I'll let him do that on his own. So without any further ado, Dr. David Fawcett.
Thanks, Scott. I was hanging on your every word as you were coming up with descriptors for what I was. Okay, good. Hi, everybody. I'm David Fawcett. Tonight, I wanted to talk about the art of self-nurturing, and I think it's something that is terribly important for both addicts and the people that love them, and in fact, I think probably for everybody, for life in general. But I think it's something that maybe is misunderstood in a way, or sometimes people think of self-nurturing as self-indulgent, and there's a little distinction there that I want to talk about briefly. But just to say a few words about self-nurturing to start, that I think sometimes we think that relaxation is something that's a luxury, that downtime is something that other people have time for, but we don't. And I think it's really important to realize that kind of relaxation and downtime is not a treat, but it's really necessary for both our physical and emotional health. And it's something, probably everyone's seen statistics where Americans work, many more hours than almost every country in the world. And I think we're just stressed and overworked and often forget the beauty of giving to ourselves a little bit. So we know it fosters both physical and mental health. And I think what I want to say more about it is the attitude that underlies self-nurturing. That is that it's loving and nurturing, and it makes us responsible for ourselves. Self-nurturing for me can be things. It can be getting a massage. It can be going for a walk. It can be behaviors. Maybe it's setting a boundary for that person that just leaves me feel exhausted and angry if I have an encounter with them. Just putting up a boundary there to keep this some distance. It could be actions. It could be getting rid of sugar, or cleaning up my diet, or making sure I get a certain amount of hours of sleep per night. So I think all those things can be self-nurturing, and it's almost like a way of life, as opposed to specific things or lists of specific things that we do. A lot of my clients have confused self-nurturing with self-indulgence. And I think oftentimes, for those of us that haven't been in the habit of being self-nurturing, almost any act of kindness for ourselves kind of feels awkward and self-indulgent. And I think I didn't have a good internal barometer of what was what for a long time. And I took feedback from people in recovery groups to help me kind of figure out, is this being self-indulgent? Am I really taking care of myself? And what's the difference? I think for me, that idea of self-indulgent, which is something we don't really want to do too often, is really an attempt to correct some unhealthy feeling, usually being empty, deprived, depressed, some attempt to correct a feeling by doing something, usually a purchase, right? I had a client who, well, I'll get to that in a second. But so we obtain an object thinking it's going to give us, that it's going to be good for us, self-nurturing. We get a big bunch of dopamine release, we feel good, and then all of a sudden there's a crash. And what comes to mind always is a client of mine who wanted to buy this $400 pair of shoes because he was having a bad week, and he did. And he got that rush, he loved it, and it lasted about 10 minutes. And then all of a sudden he realized he had a credit card bill, and the rush of the shoes was long gone. And so I think that certainly is an example of self-indulgence that maybe we could avoid if we had some better ideas about it. So some of the things that underlie self-nurturing, to me, are really the beliefs we have about ourselves. And I think this is one of the things that makes it so difficult for us to nurture ourselves sometimes as we get into recovery. So we have to have these beliefs that we deserve to feel good, right? We deserve to be taken care of. We deserve to have full, rich lives that are balanced between work and play. We're worthy of that. So I think those core beliefs that people have trouble with sometimes, and usually the default belief, by the way, is for addicts at least, and I think often for partners, is that I don't deserve this, or I'll take care of myself when, blah, 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 when something happens, when I have more time, when I retire. And that's actually a serious point. I've had a lot of friends who have retired thinking kind of deferred living until they retired. And then one of them got sick or something happened. So I think it's really, for me, self-nurturing is very much in the present tense. So I want to just give 7 ideas that I think are important as examples of self-nurturing, and then we can open up for discussion on this topic or really anything people are interested in talking about. I would really love to hear about how you take care of yourselves, because I always learn from those kind of conversations. But the first one I'd suggest is our self-talk. Not just that belief that we're worthy, but tell ourselves. And I know it can look a little weird, walking down the grocery store aisle saying to myself, I love you and appreciate who you are. But I think those are important things to do, to remind ourselves of that, because oftentimes, for me at least, it counteracts the negative chatter in my head that's often telling me, you don't deserve that. So be kind to ourselves. I think I love you, I appreciate you. Give yourself little affirmations. Taking good care of yourself would be the second one. And these are the basics that we're all aware of, right? Getting enough sleep, eating well, getting some activity, all these things that we hear about all the time, the hungry, angry, lonely, tired formula that I think is really, really critical. The third one I do is just to do nice things for yourself. And I would, this doesn't always mean the obvious, right? I'll give you a couple examples. One, sometimes I just get burned out with my phone on being on it all the time, whether it's on social media or answering emails or getting calls or just it. Our phones are a great way to pull ourselves out of our lives, right? So I'll give myself an evening without a phone. I don't think I dare do a day without a phone, but I'd love to. But I think just to kind of disconnect. And I've had friends that go on week-long retreats and disconnect from social media and their electronic lives. They go off the grid. And I think that's really a healthy thing for our brains. Another kind of silly example, I have a fan in my office. I live in Florida. It's hot here, folks. I know I've just been freezing around several parts of the country this past week. But it's warm here, so I have a fan. And it has a remote control thing to control the speed. And I'll turn it on in the morning, and at night it's late. I want to turn it off, and I can't find the remote under stacks of paper. And it's very frustrating, and it kind of gets me worked up at the end of the day. So I just have a place I put the remote every time. And it's always there, and it's a simple, stupid thing. But every time I pick up that remote, I realize I'm taking care of myself. It's like a little mini affirmation. So stuff like that make our lives just easier. A fourth way to do it, I think, is to really set healthy boundaries with others. And I mentioned that those people that kind of are draining, or someone who, for whatever reason, activates you or triggers you. And I don't mean that we can sort of run from all our situations, but I do think it's important sometimes to have appropriate boundaries where we protect ourselves and take ourselves into account and really nurture ourselves. Another way to do it, I think, is becoming our own advocate. I think sometimes we don't speak up for ourselves in a way that we should or could. And this can be subtle. I was kind of impressed. A friend of mine who's in his 70s and, very okay with aging, but I've never even listened to this, although I've heard the words. He pointed out how waiters or people in stores will say, like in a restaurant, say, "Thanks for your order, young man," as if, and it's coming from a place of kindness, I guess. But all it does is kind of highlight for him his age and makes him feel old, and kind of it's condescending, and it just kicks up a lot of negativity. So he started telling people. He'd usually pull them aside and make a scene, but say, "Look, I know you probably meant something good," but he used it as an opportunity to kind of raise awareness or consciousness of the person, and it also made him feel good about himself. So I think there's just countless opportunities for this nurturing. And just a couple more. One, to believe in yourself. I think we need to tell ourselves we can do this, we have the skills, and if we don't, we can ask for help and deserve it. And finally, the most important one probably is just to be compassionate with ourselves. I think we are so hard on ourselves with frustration and judgment and shaming and all that negative stuff that has become a habit. And I think it's really important to kind of be conscious of that and really reverse it by actively being compassionate. And if you can't bring yourself to be compassionate with yourself, there's a great concept we use in therapy with the inner child, right? And maybe be aware of that little one inside you, and you can be at least compassionate for him or her. And I think that's an important way to start. So bottom line, I think nurturing is just incredibly important. I think it's something we often think we don't have time for, but we can weave it into almost every action in our lives during the day. And I think that adds up to a really positive outcome in terms of how we feel and our emotional health as well. So I don't see any questions, I don't think, but I'd encourage people to bring it up, this topic or other topics that are on your mind tonight. We'll have a conversation.
Yeah, I noticed we've got a question, but I did want to add a little bit. You know, for a recovering sex addict like myself, you know, self-nurture is outlined in my outer circle or my outer boundary of my sex plan. You know, the inner boundary is the stuff that I should not be doing under any circumstances. Middle boundary is slippery stuff. Then the outer boundary is all the healthy parts of life, you know, things like exercising and eating right and getting enough sleep, but also having compassion for myself and believing in myself and, you know, talking to others and getting feedback and, you know, all of this self-care things that as addicts, we really don't do that. So thank you for pointing out, David, all of the other stuff, you know, self-talk and you know, in addition to self-care, because I always just think about it as, you know, hungry, angry, lonely, tired.
Take a bubble bath.
Yeah, there's a lot more to it than that, you know, and I put my keys in the same spot every day so that I don't lose them. I don't have to look for them. You know, you only have to lose your keys once before, or at least for me. So anyway, we've got a couple questions. Let's go. First question, how do you recommend dealing with a friend that sucks the energy out of you? Ooh, good question. I have some of those.
Yeah, there's a, excuse me, that unflattering term, emotional vampire, right? That, and I think we all have this experience where we will just be talking with someone and just feel exhausted, like I can barely even stay awake, or just that I'm being drained and I'm left empty. I think, you know, the obvious answer there is boundaries, good boundaries. And then beyond that, it's maybe not so obvious in terms of how to set them, what the relationship is, what that person means to you, and that sort of thing. But I think the basis of any solution there is boundaries and really taking care of yourself. And I think sometimes we get pulled into other people's drama and feel we need to help or have to help or can offer something, and sometimes that's not enough, and we're just going to get carried along. So I think boundaries are really important in that regard. Then, depending on the relationship, you know, you may want to see if you can talk to that person about that. And I think I know from my experience that I don't want to be in any kind of activated state when I'm talking to someone. I want to be out of it and not triggered and in a good place and balanced. And ask that person if we can talk, and usually schedule something and try to bring it up. And, you know, it depends on the relationship. That it may turn out that that person's not significant enough to go through that process, but I found that it can really be healing for both of us sometimes if we can have that frank conversation. And oftentimes people don't realize some of the things they're doing that cause that reaction. So it can be a learning experience for both. But I think the self-nurturing part of that is not just maintaining the boundaries, but could be also speaking up for ourselves and saying, gee, you know, this is how I'm reacting around you.
One of the things that I find, I'll back up a little bit. I'm an introvert. I know I don't seem like it online, but the difference for me between being an introvert and an extrovert is I go to a party and I'm drained, you know, after an hour. An extrovert goes to a party and all the energy that I'm losing, he's sucking it up. So I have some real extrovert friends and I adore them, but I've told them, you know, because they're important to me, exactly what David said, you know, this is what happens after a little while for me. So, you know, let's be, you know, as long as we're aware of it and I can say, you're killing me right now, give me a little break. And those friendships have actually gotten stronger because of the honesty. So I would encourage, a conversation. So
Great.
Another one, this is a great topic. Last week I failed at self-nurturing. I didn't get to any meetings or the gym. I also got overly involved in a work project, and I'm shaming you to make it worse. Say no to work. Yeah, that one I get. By the time Friday night rolled around, I was so overwhelmed I had a panic attack. I've been in recovery for about 5 months. I did reach out to a friend. It didn't act out. Congratulations. I don't have panic attacks or anxiety. Typically, I'm learning what I have to do to stay healthy. So that's more of a comment than a question, but did you want to add anything to that, David?
Yeah, I think it's just important. That's such a typical scenario of kind of getting pulled into work projects or getting overloaded with stuff and kind of just putting, and I'm guilty of this a lot, just kind of putting everything else aside to plow through and get something done. And boy, it sounds like you really got some awareness of the really direct consequences of that. And it's a really perfect example, really, because sometimes we don't think of something as severe as a panic attack reacting from not taking care of ourselves, but that can definitely lead to that reaction. And I think especially, 5 months, there's a lot of times that are tricky in recovery, but I found that period after 90 days up to about a year, where people are really starting to get they're reformulating their recovery life and resetting patterns. And it's a beautiful time to sort of make some adjustments. But I think it's also a time when we're very sensitive to such overload. At least I was sort of sensitive for several years, I think, in terms of being in my bandwidth was extremely small in early recovery. But I think, so just being careful with yourself. And it looks like you know what you did and what you need to do. And certainly you don't want to have panic attacks or anxiety. So, by the way, the physical stuff, I think going to the gym, you mentioned, that's a hugely important thing, because we live so much in our heads, at least I do. I need to kind of convert a different kind of energy sometimes and get moving. And we know that can change our physiology and kind of make us relax. So yeah, good awareness.
Yeah, and a lot of people early on in recovery will make work a higher power. Once you get, and they'd say it's that 90 days to year mark, exactly what David said. And suddenly, they think, oh, I got it, under control with my addiction. And then suddenly they throw themselves into work and, miss meetings and miss exercise for a week. And, all of the self-nurture that we do to take care of ourselves kind of goes out the window. And for me, if I'm doing that, I'm forgetting that first and foremost, I have to take care of myself or everything will fall apart.
Right.
And I don't have panic attacks, but I do get anxiety when I feel overwhelmed. And when I feel overwhelmed is when I'm not focusing on the right things. So great comment.
Just one other thing to add to that, and that sometimes we don't even have to be physically overwhelmed with stuff. I can overwhelm myself by making a to-do list, like on steroids, right? Of all the things I have to do without ever having going out and doing it. I'm overwhelmed before I even get moving because of all the stuff I have to do. So I think in many cases we do it to ourselves. I set myself up by just having these unrealistic expectations or expectations of perfection and all those things that we all know. But I think I want to make the point that it's not always a matter about their overworking hours. It can be something sitting in the calm of our home and doing it to ourselves by making to-do lists of things that kind of make us upset.
Yeah. Okay, we got another excellent question here. I attend co-ed SLAA meetings. At times, I'm the only woman or one of two women at the meetings. A particular man seems to share inappropriate information with details, and it is triggering/upsetting. I'm newish and don't know how to take care of myself in this situation. What do you suggest?
Wow, great question. So, because meetings are self-run, sometimes they can be better or worse in terms of how they're managed, how conversations are managed. I think it's not unusual, unfortunately, to have shares or pitches that are too graphic or too triggering. And that's really, I think that person is kind of in their disease when they're speaking in those terms. I think in that situation, it's, again, you got to put yourself first and think about it. I might try a different meeting. I'm not sure it's worthwhile to say anything to that person, but I think I would either find other meetings, or else if there's a group conscience somewhere at that meeting, a business meeting, to bring it up and bring up your concern about how the meeting is run and that it's triggering, and that again, it may be a situation where people are unaware of it or not catching it. But I would bet if you're feeling that, that other woman that attends the meeting is feeling that, and even some of the men are getting uncomfortable with it. So it's probably something that needs to be brought up in that community setting and the community of the meeting. Now, if you're newish, that may be a tall order to kind of speak up on your own behalf. But I would certainly share about it with people, maybe a sponsor or friends, so you don't have to carry this on your own and feel that you're reacting this by yourself. But I would either get support and feel that you can maybe bring it up and get a change, or consider just, if that's too much to do, maybe finding other meetings that are safer. I don't know if there's women's meetings and men's meetings where you live, but that might be, gender-specific meetings might be helpful there.
Yeah, one of the things I would add, I go to primarily co-ed meetings. They're SAA meetings, so sex addicts, not SLAA. But we actually have in our script, if you're feeling triggered or uncomfortable with someone's share, to simply raise your hand, and if you're the person sharing, try to use less triggering language. And once in a while, somebody will raise their hand. They're uncomfortable, they're triggered, whatever. And we have it right in the script at the beginning of the meeting. So if you're going to speak to the meeting as a whole, maybe suggest something like that. Just so people can then be aware, and that way you don't have to confront the person directly. Who David hit it on the head. He's in his addiction, and giving it play even while he's at a meeting. And that happens a lot. We don't get to 12-step recovery because we're well. We're there because we're a mess, and we don't have much control over what we're thinking and saying and doing.
Right.
So it's a learning experience.
The same thing happens, by the way, in a lot of the substance use meetings, especially Crystal Meth Anonymous, where crystal meth is so, at least in the gay community, so associated with sexual behavior that a lot of times that the sort of triggering language creeps into someone's share. And I think in those meetings, people are really, at least here in Florida where I live, people are really conscious of that, and will shut it down really fast if it happens. But it really depends on the meeting and how well it's run. And I've not heard that idea, Scott. That's a great idea of just having a standard, raise your hand. That's great.
Yeah, and we have that at pretty much every meeting I go to. And it's just part of what we do here in Palm Springs. But, like you said, everything is, excuse me, different. Every meeting's different. But you have a right to speak up if you're not comfortable speaking to that person, and I would certainly understand if you're not. Talk to the secretary of the meeting after the meeting. And we got, here's another comment. It was actually the other woman that stepped out of the room that helped her realize that she was also triggered. The two of you processed it together afterwards, which is great. The two of you can approach the secretary together and say, hey, we're uncomfortable sometimes with this guy's language or affect or whatever.
Right. And there's I don't want to be run out of a meeting that I might like, because somebody's sharing. So, you have a right to have a comfortable meeting there. Especially if it's one that you like and get stuff out of. Yeah.
And I would also add, you're going to meetings for your recovery, and, don't let anybody else run you out of a meeting that's otherwise really good. If it's a crappy meeting anyway, God, go find another meeting. But, if it's otherwise a really good meeting, don't let that person run you out. Find a way to make some changes in the group so it's a better group. So next question. What are the signs that I am triggered? I know my heartbeat increases, but I never recognized that as being triggered.
That's a great question. So everybody has their kind of unique constellation of symptoms for that. But I think there are some general ones, and they have to do what I call shock, right? We can be activated in terms of what's called sympathetic shock, which is getting flush, heartbeat racing, as you mentioned, pupils widening. It's really basically the fight or flight response, and that's our body reacting to this triggering news and trying to manage it in a way that's that's healthy for us. It's protecting us, although it feels uncomfortable. The other way that people can often react is kind of by numbing, by getting very sleepy, kind of going out of their body, feeling nothing, not hearing, kind of dissociating, going off into a daydream somewhere and just kind of checking out, floating away. And so I think there's a lot of different ways this expresses itself. I always encourage my clients to kind of get to know their own set of reactions for certain situations, because oftentimes our bodies will tell us something long before our conscious mind is aware of it. So you may feel a tightening in your chest or a pit in your stomach or sweat. I've had every possible reaction with my clients over the years. So I think just really to get tuned in. And I think oftentimes, probably more often than not, it's a physical reaction comes first. And then the conscious awareness will kind of pop in later. But pay attention. And if you may feel your heartbeat, and that's where mindfulness is useful too. Like, oh, gee, my heart's racing. What's going on with that? And maybe ask ourselves and then realize it. And then if you can process it with somebody else, like you did with the other woman, I think that's really important to get the feedback. I think a lot of times people think, well, it must be me. I'm crazy. I'm too sensitive. All kinds of self-talk that kind of is self-defeating and not very self-nurturing. So, yeah.
Yeah, for me, feeling triggered is right in the core of the body. It's a physical sensation. It's not quite butterflies. It's not quite, I don't know what it is, but I literally feel it in the core of my body. And that's whether it's a sexual trigger where I really want to act out, or it's just my emotions being triggered. I feel it in the same place. I know something's going on, and that's when I have to back up and say, okay, kind of do a little 10 step, what's going on? What's my part in it? What do I need to do about it? So, yeah.
Right. Perfect.
Would tracking emotion help to recognize if you're being triggered? David, did you freeze? David? I think David froze. You coming back?
There we go. Okay. So would tracking emotions help to recognize if I'm being triggered? Absolutely. And I think if we, part of the lifestyle, I guess, of being an addict or a partner of an addict is kind of living parallel lives with our emotions. I think sometimes our feelings unpleasant. I think it's important for us to be able to know what we're feeling. And that's why I really endorse the practice of mindfulness, which is just kind of being aware of what's going on and putting things together. Gee, I have tightness in my chest. I'm kind of feeling fear. What's going on in my environment? What's the relationship here that's happening? So I think just that self-awareness is a really huge tool.
You're freezing up on us again. You there?
And absolutely. And even tracking emotions, I think it depends on what stage someone's at in recovery, but most people early on don't have a whole lot of different feelings or emotions that they're experiencing, right? It's often just bad or good, usually bad. And then it kind of gets delineated as they progress. But I think that's also a good reason to kind of discern the distinctions between different emotions. Scott?
Yeah, you broke up on some of that, David, but I think we got the gist of it. Let me ask a question. I want to kind of, this is an overall self-nurture question, and I'll give you a situation from my life yesterday. For those of you who come to these meetings often, you'll recognize a different background. I am living in a new house. I've moved. And my mother, whose message to me when I was growing up was, you can do anything you want as long as I do it for you, which was very shaming. It basically told me I can't do anything right ever. unless she does it for me. So I'm in my new house. I got some new furniture. I hung a little bit of artwork last night, and my mother has been badgering me for pictures for an entire week. So knowing better, I sent her some pictures, 3 pictures on my phone to her phone. So she's 2,000 plus miles away, looking at a phone, a picture of, you know, my living room on her phone. And I immediately get a text back that says, "It's lovely, but to my eye, it would look better if you moved this here and that there and this here and they had a different wall color," and, you know, and it reinforced all of the shame and resentment from my childhood, and I felt it right here. It was an emotional trigger. It didn't make me want to, you know, turn on the computer and look at porn, but it upset the hell out of me. And I still have not responded to her. But, you know, David, take that situation and maybe run through the 7 things that you gave us earlier about how could I self-nurture and work through that.
No, that's a great example. And boy, it's a classic one too, of old patterns being awakening with the situation. So one thing, the first thing we talked about was send loving messages to yourself. So I think it's important to be able to really do kind of a reality check for yourself and in that situation. So what's a loving message that you could have said to yourself, or you can still say to yourself about that? An affirming one.
Well, you know, I did do that. I reminded myself that, you know, the place that I had been renting, that I had decorated all by myself without my mother's help. My landlord put it on the market, wanted too much money for it, but it sold for full asking price to the first people who walked in the door because it showed really well. I was like, I think I know how to decorate, you know. So yeah, I had to remind myself that, you know, and I'm not trying to please her. I'm trying to please me. I'm the one who's living here.
Right, exactly. So then the second one would be taking good care of yourself, right? Sleeping, eating. I don't know how your sleep was. It was probably disturbed last night if you were thinking about this. But I think
I went to a meeting and shared and spewed and
okay.
I felt a lot better. So I slept fine.
Okay, good. But I think that's it. And that's the important thing about this, to release it, right? To get it out of you, to externalize it. And so sharing is a great way to do that. Physical exercise is a great way to do that, just to work out that energy. So it's not recycling in our systems a lot. Doing something nice for yourself. You know, I don't know if you could have done something kind today, but go out and give yourself some kind of treat. Again, is that self-indulgence? Well, maybe, but I think it's doing something that is a kind, nice thing for yourself.
I had pizza for lunch today.
Sorry?
I had pizza for lunch. I love
All
pizza.
right, pizza. Of all the ones that I listed earlier, probably the biggest one here is setting healthy boundaries. In terms of just maybe not sharing with her too much at this point, but at some point, hopefully, maybe having a chat with her. I mean, you've probably had that before, so it might be an exercise in frustration. But you know, to have you do what is the kindest thing for you in the situation, and that may be just dismissing whatever she has to say, or maybe just not sharing much with her, or whatever works for you. But I think those boundaries are going to be important. And I heard you say this already, that believing in yourself, right? You have done it before. You have a track record of decorating someplace and having good outcomes. And the last one I also want to just highlight, and that's to be compassionate with yourself. Because I think even though we have a reaction sometimes, or we get kind of defensive, or we can even be self-affirming, I think sometimes internally we're still being really hard on ourselves and judging, and that inner critic. And so I think I'd really be conscious of that and do whatever you can to be compassionate with yourself. And even for your reaction in that situation, it's a reaction that's a message to you, and it's a message of help, really.
Yeah, and I am beating myself up a little bit for, you know, participating in the first place by sending her pictures, knowing that she's going to do what she does, which is criticize and try to control, and you know.
So, oh boy, putting on my therapist hat here. So that would be a great little exercise to go back and see what was going on before that and what your intention was and how you were feeling about yourself and what you were looking for. Yeah.
You're going to make me work. I'm going to have to do this now.
That's a suggestion.
Thank you.
Okay.
We have another question here. I find that stress and boredom at work causes me to avoid my work. Then my mind wanders. Then I go to chat rooms and to find emotional connection. I have not been able to identify the reasons I do this except to feel wanted. Your thoughts on this?
Okay, a couple things. One, thank you. It's because it's a great reminder that we can fall out of kind of loving self-care through boredom. I think sometimes we think of overwork, being too busy, trying to do too much. And that's certainly one of the ways people often get into beating themselves up. But I think boredom is a really huge one, especially for, I think, sex addicts and for stimulant addicts. There's this intolerance of stillness. And I think there's kind of a need for something. Sometimes people kind of shake up things, get into drama, create drama, because they just can't stand that boredom. So thank you for bringing that point up in terms of a source of stress. I think anytime we can feel our mind wander, and I think that little checking out is kind of a dissociative state. And I think, again, with mindfulness, to really look back at what's going on in that moment. And it's not just the boredom or the stress, but it's what are you telling yourself about that? What are you believing yourself about that? What's the implicit message of that state that is kind of making you want to be uncomfortable? And I think to take a look at that, the boredom and the stress are situations, but I think you want to try to identify the feeling. I know you said you don't really know what that is, but I think it'd be useful to drill down a little bit into that. And I found it really helpful because sometimes these things elude me when I'm trying to figure them out. So I find it really helpful to talk to somebody, go have coffee and tell them the situation and just kind of walk through it with another person with them asking you questions. And sometimes you can get a lot of awareness about the process by just kind of going back and going through it slowly. So I think that's really important. I would watch the dissociation, the kind of drifting away. I always pay attention if I daydream, and everybody daydreams a lot probably, but it's not random. I think I daydream when there's something going on that's either boring to me or I want to check out, or mostly often I'm uncomfortable. Something is giving me discomfort, and I kind of use that time to think about that cruise to Spain that I always wanted to do, or something totally random that just pops into your head. So just be careful of that. And I would just use mindfulness, and by that I mean just simply paying attention to what's going on with your feelings and your emotions, and then incorporate self-care too. You mentioned stress at your work. I think boundaries extend to work, right? If we need good boundaries in terms of a beginning and an end to the workday and work week. And I think it's something we're all guilty of, but I think it's something that's really important to maintain too, especially in this day and age of kind of constant on-call. It's really important. We have to do that for ourselves. So it sounds like you're on the right track. You have a lot of awareness. You have one other sentence there. I have not been able to identify the reasons I do this except to feel wanted. And I think that really goes back to really the core issue here. And that's wanting to belong, wanting to feel worthy, wanting to be loved ultimately. And I think we go through a lot of hoops with overworking, with perfecting, being perfect or trying to be perfect, and all kinds of ways to get that attention and feel wanted. And so I'd really take a look at that as well. And what healthy ways and what unhealthy ways do you look for validation? I think sometimes most of us who have been brushed by addiction somehow don't often seek validation in healthy ways until we kind of get into recovery and learn how to do that. It's not something that, to me at least, it's not something I was born with. I'd kind of learn how to do that. In fact, if anything, I had I had the wrong set of instructions internalized here. I need to kind of overwrite them and learn how to do that in healthy ways. And again, meetings, it's why we always talk about meetings is so important for so many reasons. But that's one of the social component of interaction in a meeting is a really healing force for that and that awareness.
Yeah, I mean, this is the cycle of addiction. You know, I feel stressed, bored, or not good enough. I don't want to feel that way, so I find a way to escape, which is my addiction. I go online and look at porn, or I cruise for sex, or whatever. And then I feel bad about doing that. And that stresses me out, or makes me anxious, or makes me feel not good enough. So I want to escape that. And, you know, and I actually don't like cycle. I wish we would call it a downward spiral, because cycle, it's, you know, says we're staying at the same level. And as an addict, I mean, I wasn't staying at the same level. I was flushing myself down the toilet into the sewer. And I was doing it, you know, because I felt something I didn't want to feel. I escaped it. I felt bad about escaping it. That made me feel worse. You know, down the toilet. Another question here. As a single woman, divorced for 3 years, I find myself wanting to stay away from events with a lot of couples. Do you think that's social avoidance or self-care? Very good question. Again, a lot of good questions today.
Yeah, they're great. Really great. So I think this is a great question that can point out that a behavior can be kind of one or the other, the same behavior, right? So I think it boils down to motivation sometimes. And so you're staying away, feeling uncomfortable, makes sense, I think, in a way, because it feels awkward. Times when I've been single, it was kind of uncomfortable sometimes to be around all couples. And I felt, you know, even I was kind of treated differently and felt certainly I was being treated differently. So I understand the reaction. I think I would take a look, do some self-reflecting and see what the motivation for that wanting to stay away is. And if it's coming from a place of feeling hurt or less than, or somehow if it's driven by negative feelings, I think I'd really take a look at that and process it and see what's really going on there, because it can be driven in a way that's just avoiding the problem, avoiding the issue, and it'll keep repeating itself. And it maybe has for 3 years is not a huge long time, but it's not short either. So this pattern maybe you may be cycling through something that you could break the pattern by getting an awareness of what's going on. But my point here is that so staying away from meetings can be driven by maybe avoidance, which is not a good thing, but it might also be driven by by setting good boundaries for yourself and learning how to take care of yourself and owning that feeling and being okay with it. So I think it all comes down to not the behavior itself, but what underlies that behavior. What's the motivation? Is it something that is, to put it very simply, is it something that's pushing you toward healing, or is it something that you feel is kind of holding you back? And I think sometimes when our heads can't figure that out, our guts can tell us, you know, do a little check in with yourself and see if you can discern what that's all about. Because I think sometimes with the behavior itself doesn't give us enough information. We need to see what the decision and the belief is about yourself underneath it. It's an issue though, but I would say 3 years is probably a long time if there's still some self-consciousness about being single or whatever the issue is. You know, I think when I say 3 years, I think there may be a pattern that's repeating itself here that is causing you discomfort and could be broken with some insight and awareness and reflection. So good luck with that. I think, yeah.
Yeah, motivation is a big, I always ask myself, why am I doing this or not doing this? And that will usually tell me whether I should or shouldn't do it. You know, I have a sponsee and pornography is in his middle circle. And our agreement is he'll call me before he logs on. And my question every time is, what are you feeling that you don't want to feel? And she says, nothing. I'm having a good day. I'm just kind of feeling a little, and this seems like a better outlet than going to a sex club. And I'll say, are you sure that answer is 100% honest? And he'll say, yeah. I'd say, okay, well, do your thing. But if he calls me and says, well, I had a shitty morning and so-and-so said this to me and then this, I'm like, no, turn the computer off and go for a walk or, something else. And, staying away from events with a lot of couples, that's tough. I'm single, I get it. But 3 years is a long time to avoid something to avoid what might be a fun social situation when, by the way, you might meet someone just because you're a little uncomfortable.
I guess I just add what I kind of read between the lines, and that is that, and I'm making this up, but I'm not okay. It's not okay for me to be single, or being single is not okay. I need to have someone else. I need to be a couple to be really okay. And so, if that's the belief, that can be really instructive as well. So there's all kinds of ways this can be useful. That situation can be useful for you.
Yeah, it could be a real learning experience. We've got about 10 minutes left. If anybody's got any more questions, now is the time to ask them because we're all caught up with the ones we've got. On the topic of self-nurture, I have a good friend who's a neuropsychologist, and he's a big Franklin Covey fan, and Franklin Covey uses the metaphor of sharpening the saw. He talks about a woodcutter who's just sawing and sawing and sawing and sawing, and this other guy takes a lot of breaks, and the other guy's getting more work done. And the guy who's just sweating and working, and he's like, well, how do you get so much work done? And he said, well, I take a break once in a while and sharpen my saw. And that's Franklin Covey's analogy for, is it Franklin Covey or William or whatever?
Sure.
It's whoever it is. That's the analogy for, you got to back up a little bit and give yourself a break. And my friend will look at me and say, did you sharpen your saw today? To which I do not respond very well, but he's usually right. We have another question here. It says, I'm currently working on step 2. Any thoughts on how to approach this step? Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Is anyone impressed that I know that by heart?
Well, that's a huge step, and it can be a challenge for some people depending on their background. I think for me, I had to kind of clear out some misconceptions I had before I was able to really grasp that step, with a lot of baggage of beliefs and attitudes. And so for me at least, it was a process of kind of understanding where I was maybe not having a full picture of an understanding. And that acceptance piece was also critical for me, which took a while. I was a challenge to accept a power greater than myself, accept, I guess, my addiction by default. So I think it's a matter of time. I think sometimes we rush the steps too much. I think I know in treatment centers I used to like zip through them in a few weeks. But I think it's really important to take your time with this step. Got a lot of feedback. I think it's something that we were talking about being triggered. Step 2 is one of those steps that triggers a lot because of all the beliefs people have and the challenges and their own personal experience. So I think the idea of self-nurturing is a really beautiful concept to incorporate with step 2 and doing step 2, because it's one that is very challenging and emotionally triggering. I think to really be kind to yourself, to be compassionate with yourself, to take the time to work on it quietly, not in a rush, taking care of yourself physically, all those things we've talked about tonight can be beneficial for it. But it's definitely one of the steps that can be triggering and challenging for people. It's one that requires that we take care of ourselves while we're doing it. And Scott, do you have other?
Yeah, for addicts new to recovery, most of us would rather eat dirt than ask for help. It's just true. I mean, in my own addiction, I did everything on my own. I was going to take care of it. No, I don't need your help. So, asking for help and accepting help from other people and from a program and from a higher power, this was not on the agenda for me. This is not what I went to recovery to get. I wanted my consequences to go away. I didn't want other people helping me. And, some of that is my mother, who helped me, my whole life, and, in very shaming ways. I had to get over that. It took me a while to work step 2 and step 3. It took me, as a matter of fact, my sponsor, I was struggling with step 3 so much. He said, why don't we skip over it and work the rest of the steps? And when we get to step 12, which reads, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried, etc. So he pointed that out and said, when we get to step 12, we'll revisit step 3 if we have to. And interestingly enough, we didn't have to. But it took a while for me to open up and accept help.
I think too, it's really difficult, but it's so important that we at least identify something bigger than us. I mean, that's a critical piece of recovery. And I think, and it doesn't have to be, a preconceived notion of God or any specific guy with a white beard or whatever. It can be, and a lot of people, I think, use kind of the group as a bridge to that. It's just something bigger than them. And so I think for me, it was a process. That accepting was a long, slow process that had its ups and downs. And then I realized I had different bargains with my higher power. So when things would go wrong, I'd take my faith back and, back and forth. So it's a complicated relationship with higher power, but definitely one that you need to be gentle with yourself and not delay. I know people that take years doing it, which I think is wrong too. But to really be kind to yourself while you're in that process. We're very vulnerable in some of these steps, in all of the steps, but some more than others, I think. And we really have to be gentle and kind with ourselves for sure.
Yeah. So we've got a couple minutes left, and I just wanted to. I actually scribbled down your 7 things, 7 ways to self-nurture, and I wanted to review them because I think they're so important. And you're going to write a blog on this for us, yes?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Awesome. So check back on sexandrelationshiphealing.com to see it in writing. But self-talk, which is, affirmations, self-care, sleep, food, getting some exercise, doing nice things for yourself, which is more than just eating an ice cream cone. It's, organizing your life and, things like that, which I love. Healthy boundaries is such a huge, huge thing. Maybe we should talk about boundaries one of these weeks, David.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah. Because I think a lot of people have misconceptions about boundaries and what they are and how to implement them and how to keep them and things. That would be a great topic. Be your own advocate. And I love the example you gave about, I'm of an age now where I'm not a senior, but people will say, and when I go to the movies, they say, I'll go with 3 friends who are 70, and they'll say senior, and it pisses me off. I'm like, no, not old enough, So yeah, so I totally empathize with your friend. Believing in yourself, but also the other half of that is knowing when you need to ask for help, which goes back to our step 2 question. Yeah. And then having compassion for yourself, which is a real big one for a lot of us.
Yeah, for sure.
So anything you want to add to that to wrap up, David? I think this was a great topic. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think we covered it. I really appreciate all the questions and interaction. There's really people really involved. It was great.
Yes, great group today. David is the 2nd and 4th Wednesday of every month, so he'll be back in 2 weeks. We hope to see you then, and check out the schedule. We've got stuff going on almost every day now. And again, if you know anybody who needs treatment, give us a call because we are opening our centers. And I see one more question. Oh, just a thank you very much. You're welcome.
Oh. And the picture looks great, Scott.
Yeah, thank you. The picture, it's a work in progress. I'm not sending this to my mother. Thank you, everybody, for attending. We'll see you in a couple weeks.
Okay. Good night.
Talk to you later, David.